Hello, and welcome to Reader 2 Standing By, Episode 13. I'm Wedge.
And I'm Wraith 14.
And we are so happy to have you join us in our journey through the X-Wing series of Star Wars stories from the old expanded universe. This episode, we're covering the history between Starfighters of Adumar by Aaron Allston and the Union comic series by Michael A. Stackpole, as far as it affects the characters of Wedge Antilles and the other main characters in the X-Wing series of books and comics. We're also going to have a special Sledge News segment for Star Wars movies at the end, so stay tuned. Spoiler alert, we will spoil everything we've covered so far and all the books and comics that we're covering today, which is quite a bit this time. So let's dive right into it. First, I want to go through the chronological publication history of the text we're going to cover today. And this is important because even though some of the books are set after other books chronologically, they were written previously, which means that they don't have access to the same information, which means that the portrayal of the characters is going to be quite different. So, in 1994, we had The Crystal Star published by Vonda McIntyre. This does not feature Wedge, so we're not going to talk about it, but it is after Planet of Twilight. In 1995, all 3 volumes of the Corellian Trilogy by Roger McBride Allen were released, and that was Ambush at Corellia, Assault at Salonia, and Showdown at Centerpoint. And Wedge featured in one chapter in the middle book, Assault at Salonia. In 1996, the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy was released, all 3 volumes, which was Before the Storm, Shield of Lies, and Tyrant's Test by Michael P. Cube McDowell. The New Rebellion by Kristine Kathryn Rusch, which we will be covering in depth this episode, which has an extensive portrayal of Wedge and his commanding activities. Rogue Squadron, Wedge's Gamble, and The Krytos Trap were all also published in 1996. In 1997, Planet of Twilight, the 3rd volume of the unofficial Callista trilogy by Barbara Hambly, was released, as well as the comic series Crimson Empire 1. At least it started. I think it continued on to next year. And Timothy Zahn's Spectre of the Past was released in the first of the 2 Hand of Thrawn books. Michael Stackpole also published the final volume of the X-Wing series, X-Wing quadrilogy, The Back to War, in 97. In the next year, 1998, we had the completion of Crimson Empire's first miniseries and the publication of its second miniseries, Crimson Empire 2. I think it was Council of Blood or something like that. We also had the publication of Vision of the Future by Tim Zahn, which completed the Hand of Thrawn duology. Aaron Allston also released the first and second Wraith Squadron novels, Wraith Squadron and Iron Fist, in 98. And then from 99 to 2003, we mostly had publications in the New Jedi Order or prequel era books, so they didn't really touch the time between the Battle of Endor in Return of the Jedi and Vision of the Future in that time of publishing. In 2003, the Jedi Academy video game, which was the 4th in the Dark Forces series, and there's kind of an ongoing joke, as I put in the show notes. It's Dark Forces 4, Jedi Knight 3, Jedi Outcast 2, Jedi Academy 1. It's they gave so many weird subtitles for this. In 2008, they released the Essential Atlas, which was one of the 3rd generation essential guides to the Star Wars universe, and did a lot of timeline filling up of this segment of time between Planet of Twilight and Vision of the Future. 4 years later, in 2012, Crimson Empire 3, which was set just after Crimson Empire 2, and The Essential Guide to Warfare were published. We will be talking pretty extensively about both the Essential Atlas and the Essential Guide to Warfare's contribution to this timeline period, but Essential Guide to Warfare is not fun if you are the kind of person who finds undercutting the X-Wing books upsetting, which is me.
And I believe we discussed that in the Izard's Revenge pod.
We did. I simply have to say, just because we're talking about it doesn't mean we recommend people buy this book. Certainly not me. Now, let's go through it chronologically. So, in 13 ABY, the same year as Starfighters of Adamar, Planet of Twilight happens. The Death Seed Plague Crisis. What's the planet? Shoot. Do you remember the planet in Planet of Twilight?
Yeah, I'm not going to know that. But while you're looking that up, Wedge is mentioned in that Luke tells stories about him and talks about he could potentially be part of a search team if he can be spared, which means Luke was not cleared by New Republic intelligence to know about Adamar. Given that Planet of Twilight is referenced in Adamar as taking place at the same time, in terms of how Princess Leia is unavailable for consultation by Wedge's team.
Yeah, so that happened in the planet of Nam Chorios, which, of course, if you read the Fate of the Jedi series, set nearly two or three decades later, also takes place on that planet. I made a mistake. Also in 13, after Battle of Yavin, Crimson Empire takes place. This is basically a sequel to the Dark Empire series, focusing on Royal Guard or former Royal Guard characters and the most incompetent rebel until Jyn Erso appeared.
As a Rogue One fan, I won't dispute that for the sake of not getting way off course. But yeah, the audio drama of Crimson Empire 1 is amusing, if only for how the villain actor just goes 110% in his deliveries.
Wedge does appear in this, and it was a huge piece of Wedge's lore. Now, Dark Empire had already shown Wedge commanding and losing a Star Destroyer in naval combat on
Two,
the Battle
actually.
of Coruscant.
Well,
Lando was commanding the other one.
I thought they were co-commanding both of them.
That doesn't make sense. I would just think that Wedge is on one and Lando's on the other.
Well, I think they're co-commanding the one that the World Devastator eats later on.
Well, Dark Empire is a mess. But what it did do is it made Wedge a Star Destroyer commander. So Crimson Empire, in the grand tradition of super weapons and making everything bigger, makes Wedge a super Star Destroyer commander. He's the general on the command deck of the Lusankia and commanding not just Rogue Squadron, but Rogue Wing, a group of X, B, and A wings. This is only in the first Crimson Empire. He doesn't show up in 2 or 3, but it did require that Aaron Allston make Wedge the commander of Lusankia during Starfighters of Adamar. So that was very important in setting up his lore for that. The next year of history, 14 after the Battle of Yavin, featured 2 stories, the Crystal Star, which had no Wedge, so we're not talking about it, and the Jedi Academy game. One of the missions, there's probably between 15 and 20 missions in the game, has your character. Oh, nuts. What is your character's name? It's the Jedi Apprentice.
Or the player character?
The player character. What's the player character?
Jaden Core.
Yeah, Jaden
I think the
Core.
one.
Because it could be a boy or a girl. So Jaden Core is your main character, and he or she goes on a mission with Wedge to I don't think it's Bespin, but it's basically exactly the same as Bespin, and you're attacking Tabana gas platforms. And Wedge's X-Wing comes in and destroys them after you put sensor beacons on them. So it reminds me a lot of the missions in Solo Command, where the Wraiths put beacons on the bin ring building and have the rogues blow them up. And I'm not sure. I think Dennis Lawson played Wedge in that, but I'm not sure. Whoever played Wedge was pretty good, though. It sounded like Dennis Lawson. There's nothing, apparently, that happened in 15 ABY, which I think is actually a plot point in Black Fleet Crisis, where they say that there's been no conflict for about a year. In 16 to 17, after the Battle of Yavin, the Black Fleet Crisis occurs, and Wedge shows up just in the evaluation of the performance and political debate of the Fifth Fleet's live fire exercise, which opens the book, and he also supports Leia. Any comments about Black Fleet Crisis's Wedge appearance?
Not particularly, other than I'm glad he wasn't main pilot, because main pilots in Black Fleet Crisis do not have a tendency to last. And it looks like Wedge was not the voice in Jedi Academy, or Lawson was not the voice of Wedge in Jedi Academy. It was Chris Cox.
Okay. I think it was a pretty good voice. In 17 years after the Battle of Yavin, we had the New Rebellion, and Wedge has a very big role, which we'll dive into depth after we finish this timeline summary. The next year, 18 years after the Battle of Yavin, we had the Corellian Trilogy. Again, in the final chapter of the second book, Wedge is in command of the task force which is evacuating the star system that the Corellian conspiracy has threatened to destroy. And he has to deal with the fact that a lot of people don't believe him until the sun starts to visibly go nova. And so he's constantly flying people back and forth in this little ship, getting people, and the fleet has to jump to hyperspace before the sun goes nova, and he's screaming to let them go back for one more ride because he knows there's people waiting. But he would have died if they left him and let him go. So he watches as the sun blows up, and I think they were only able to get about half the population. It's a devastating scene, and
Yeah.
it doesn't. It has a couple of important lore points. It has Wedge in command of Rogue Squadron again, which he's not in the Rebellion. So there's a sense that he is moving in the right direction. But I think he's still in charge of that task force. He's not just Rogue Leader. It doesn't really have a lot of specific Wedge details. Again, this was written in 1995 before any of the X-Wing books or comics came out. And so there weren't a lot of strong personality details about Wedge to show up. So he's mostly just an observer and a good soldier and a guy who cares about the people he's trying to help, which are all true, but it's not really specific to Wedge.
Right.
Now, here's where the Essential Atlas and Essential Guide to Warfare fill in a big event that none of the books ever reference. And this is a section called Imperial Skirmishes. Now, the book and a lot of fans, when I say the book, I mean Wikipedia, say that Imperial Skirmishes happened in 17 years after the Battle of Yavin. Essential Atlas and Essential Guide to Warfare both simply say it's after the New Rebellion, after the Almania Crisis. They don't say it's before or after the Corellian Crisis, and it does have to be before the Hand of Thrawn. I think it makes more sense to be after the Corellian Trilogy, but most fans disagree. As far as I can tell, there is nothing that hammers it down to a specific date, though. It just has to be after Almania and before Hand of Thrawn. And basically what happens is Pelion, reluctantly, at the command of the Moffs, and Dala with her core warlords, so that means the warlords of the deep core further into the galaxy than Coruscant, they do a two-pronged attack from Galactic North and Galactic Center at the Republic's heart, and basically Garm Belublis destroys Dala in the core and then comes to help Wedge and Akbar in the Galactic North, and they simply devastate the Empire's forces, which leads to Pelion deciding that they need to make peace in the Hand of Thrawn. There is just almost no information about this anywhere, because as I said, it only appears in these two essential guides. It's not in any comics, any novels, any even short stories for RPG magazines anywhere. This is completely made up for these essential guides. And it's fun, but I'm irritated that they let these essential guide makers have a whole war that happens and nothing ever references it anywhere.
Yeah, I've seen the idea that some of Luke's actions, and this is a fan idea, not official.
This is my fan idea.
Yeah, that some of Luke's actions during the skirmishes may have led to attitudes other people close to him have in Hand of Thrawn.
Yeah, that makes most sense to me, because in Hand of Thrawn, both Han and Mara act like Luke has been doing the kinds of huge force powers that you see in Dark Empire and the Jedi Academy trilogy. But in Black Fleet Crisis, New Rebellion, and the Corellian Trilogy, Luke is actually very restrained and tends to be pretty mature in how he uses the Force. So I think it would make sense that Luke, grieving the death of his former girlfriend Gariel Capson in the Corellian Trilogy, goes to fight in the Galactic North with Wedge and Akbar, and he basically rips ships apart in space with the Force. Like, you see him just do these spectacular things that are very scary, and that's why Han and Mara are really concerned about him in the Hand of Thrawn. But again, completely fan theory. There's no evidence from either the Essential Atlas or the Essential Guide to Warfare that Luke was participating. I just think it makes more sense that way. Bum, bum, bum. All right. So now we're going to do our deep dive. So I'm very excited about this. We're going to be talking about the New Rebellion and then the two Hand of Thrawn books. And we're only going to be really talking about the stuff that has to do with Wedge or the X-Wing characters. So let's get into the New Rebellion.
Which really is mainly Wedge up until Hand of Thrawn standby. Okay, did I cut out or did you cut out?
I think you cut out. I didn't hear anything.
Okay. I was just commenting that, at least as far as New Rebellion, the only X-Wing character is Wedge, because X-Wing was still getting off the ground.
Yes.
So you're not going to see Tycho, Corran, Wraiths, etc.
Yeah, although Timothy Zahn did use Wes and Hobby from Empire Strikes Back in The Last Command. So,
right.
But Kristine Kathryn Rusch chose not to do that. All right, so we start with General Antilles, who is implied, but not directly stated, to be the Chief of Staff of Starfighter Command, has ordered all X-Wings to be upgraded to clean fighter status, causing problems for Luke as he argues with his young Tatooinean mechanic Cole Fardreamer. Later, as Cole tries to return Luke's X-Wing to its original status with R2-D2, he's arrested by overzealous guards, and General Antilles himself shows up in full dress uniform with 2 bodyguards. He investigates Cole's report of bombs in the upgraded X-Wing personally, and is very upset that security shot R2-D2. Leia interrupts the investigation, and Wedge reveals that he ordered the upgrade program for the X-Wings, along with the Chiefs of Staff, because the X-Wings weren't aging well, and the refit was unusually cheap. Wedge takes full responsibility before Leia's fury, though he didn't order the bombs installed knowingly. He also comforts her in their mutual concern for Luke flying in a bomb-filled X-Wing.
As Leia calls an inner council meeting, Wedge helps her when the villain Queller? I'm not sure this got an audiobook, so I don't know. Sends her terrifying visions, then backs her up to the hill. Sorry, I didn't fully read. What's that part mean?
He backs Leia up. Wedge.
Oh, yeah, he fully backs Leia up. Okay. Wedge is also very mad when a Senator Miedo accuses Han Solo of treason, and part of the element is the New Republic has started letting former Imperials into the Senate, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Wedge also observes when Leia receives Queller's glowing message about having captured Luke and fiercely defies the evil Force user. As Leia, Wedge, and Admiral Akbar confer following Queller's message, they discover that he has been based in the Almania system.
Wedge, working with Mon Mothma, insists on accompanying Leia to Almania in a secret mission to rescue Luke and confront Queller, along with a fleet of 3 Mon Calamari cruisers, the Yavin and the Calamari, new MC-90 ships, and the Tatooine, likely an MC-80. They had to scrap the X-Wings because they're all filled with bombs right now, and using about 2 squadrons of Headhunters, A-Wings, B-Wings, and Y-Wings. A very, very small complement of fighters, considering they have 3 capital ships about the size of Star Destroyers. But I wonder if Russ doesn't know how big Mon Calamari ships are supposed to be. At Almania, Wedge faces a fleet of 3 Victory-class Star Destroyers with a full TIE group and senses something is wrong about them. As his fighters clash with the Almanian TIEs, Wedge notices they're using pre-Yavin tactics and deduces that Queller has committed all his forces. Ordering an all-out assault, his 3 capital ships close with the Star Destroyers.
One of Wedge's Mon Calamari cruisers, the Tatooine, is destroyed as Talon Card's smuggler forces join the fight to help the New Republic. Realizing that Queller's ships are completely crewed by droids, Wedge tricks them into thinking he's on their side by firing ineffectively at the Wild Card and the Calamari. The Victory-class Star Destroyers pull alongside Wedge's ship, thinking he's friendly, and then he orders his pilots to snipe the soft spot on those ships to destroy them at close range, then dive away from the enemy. They destroy 2 of the ships, and Wedge takes over a gunnery station himself to destroy the final capital ship. Wedge, Leia, Han, Luke, and Cole, R2 and 3PO return to Coruscant as heroes to great popular acclaim.
So as you can see, Wedge gets a pretty big chunk of the action in the New Rebellion, which is pretty cool. Now, as I said, this was published the same year that Rogue Squadron started being published as both a book and a comic series. And we really want to focus on what is said about Wedge's character, and does this give him any important feats that we should mention when we're thinking about Wedge. Now, it says in the book that Children of the Jedi happened 6 years before the New Rebellion, which doesn't quite work with the final timeline. It was more like 5 years, I think. But it's a pretty big amount of time passing between the Darksaber and Starfighters of Adumar events and the New Rebellion. 4 or 5 years. So, in universe, we now know that Wedge has been married to Ayala for 3 to 4, maybe even 5 years, depending on how soon after Adumar they got married. He is now the Chief of Staff of Starfighter Command. Now, this is a bit of an assumption. He has never called the chief of staff. What the closest we come is he says to Leia that the chiefs of staff met and he was at the meeting, implying that he's probably chief of staff of the Starfighter Command. But again, no one addresses him by that title and no one talks about that.
And this is kind of treating Starfighter Command as being like the New Republic Air Force.
Yeah.
In the Joint Chiefs model.
Yeah. So Wikipedia does say that he was chief of staff of the Starfighter Command. I am inclined to agree with them, but I think that we have to acknowledge that this is an assumption and not a stated fact. The Wikipedia also assumes that he leaves that position after New Rebellion to lead the Rogues again, even though the next significant appearance we have for Wedge in Corellian Trilogy implies that he's commanding not just the Rogues, but also the Nardus, a Coruscant home defense fleet Mon Calamari cruiser in the evacuation efforts due to center points exploding of various stars. So there's a lot of speculation involved in what exactly Wedge's career was like between Starfighters Vatimar and Spectre of the Past, where he's given a firm position again.
Yeah, if you want me to talk about my headcanon on that you've heard before, is that Wedge becomes Chief of Staff of Starfighter Command after Black Fleet Crisis on account of how Starfighter operations do not go well in Black Fleet Crisis.
And by do not go well, we mean something like 90% casualties. It is a slaughter.
Yeah, including of new Starfighter bomber, the K-Wing. And that lines up well with how Sile Antilles, Wedge's daughter, is born in 1780Y, and Myri, his second daughter, is born in 1880Y. So it makes sense he'd have more of a desk role to be home with the kids.
Yeah, so he can,
when possible,
support Ayala and just be there as they're really tiny and, bond with them. I really like that. I think it makes this section of Wedge, where he still really wants to fly, that's a nice note in the New Rebellion that he loves flying and wishes he were flying. But being mostly a Coruscant chief of staff position allows him to be home regularly, whereas he's not going on, extended fleet campaigns like he was when he was commanded in Lusankya or when he was with Han Solo on the Mon Ramonda. Like, that would be really rough.
There is an interesting detail, and I wonder if it comes from the first Legacy of the Force book, that Sile was born on Corellia, even though she would have grown up on Coruscant. So it made me wonder if Ayala went back for that.
Well, we do know that Corellia would have been back in New Republic hands around this time. So it could be fun to think that, Wedge and Ayala probably live most on Coruscant, but when they got pregnant, they were like, we want her to be born on Corellia. I mean, I know some families like to do that. They want their kids to be born in a specific place. So they'll go on vacation when the mother's due date is and stay until she's born. So I think that makes sense. Kristine Kathryn Rusch does give Wedge some pretty cool descriptions. He's got neat hair, which fits with what Aaron Allston describes in Starfighters Vatimar. He wears his full dress uniform when he's walking around Coruscant. Maybe, I think there was like the Senate was opening when it got bombed. Maybe that's why he's in full dress uniform.
I think they're talking about like the Galactic Civil War is over, but it's also, I think, because they've formed like a new type of Senate that includes the Imperialists. So this is convening the first meeting, and in the text, Leia is in the process of announcing that when the explosion happens.
Yeah, so it's kind of a celebration occasion, which is why he's wearing that full dress. Rusk says that he has a thin and powerful body, the hardened look of a man who has seen too many fights. And then later, as he prepares to lead the attack on Almania, he wears his general's uniform and slicks his hair back. A bit unusual for him. We don't usually see Wedge with slicked back hair. Now, you had a note about why Wedge orders the X-Wing upgrade program.
Yeah, so the key thing about that upgrade program is it removes the astromechs from X-Wings, which X-Wings and Y-Wings, they had astromechs, but B-Wings, A-Wings...
No, E-Wings do have astromechs.
I was saying B-Wings, sorry.
Okay.
I meant B-Wings anyway. B-Wings and A-Wings, they do not have astromechs. E-Wings have a specialized R7, I think it is, astromech, although I believe they said later versions could support R2s and R5s. So the astromechless X-Wing was supposed to work better, but I highly doubt the Wedge Antilles of the X-Wing novels would do such a thing purely of his own coordination. Given how both he relies on his astromech and how he'd see other rogues like Corran being very attached as well.
Although there's a good chance that Corran is also taking family leave time, given when Valen and Gisela are born. There's a nice bit of character for Wedge when he gets very angry at Han Solo being accused of treason. His friendship and his relationship from Solo Command and that campaign against Zinj is nicely intact. Of course, that wouldn't happen for another 2 to 3 years in publishing years.
Yeah, the level of Han's military career was not set in stone either. So that goes up and down in terms of his level of trust. And we also see how Han still doesn't trust the most prominent introduced character of the Thrawn trilogy, other than Thrawn Mara Jade, in ways that are bizarre from a chronological standpoint, but make a bit more sense when you consider the publishing timeline. I also had it that this isn't in universe the first time Wedge has gone off rogue, which is kind of the official explanation for him taking a fleet with him to Almania to support Leia. But this time he does have an actual fleet rather than cobbled together armada of smuggler ships like during the Back to War. He also has presence in Leia's contentious talks with the Senate leaders. Yeah, like when they call Han a traitor, he says it's stupid to their face. And that makes sense with the X-Wing and Thrawn trilogy events.
I think that the battle itself is a little silly. The number of starfighters just seems ludicrously low, unless you assume that they simply didn't have very many starfighters because they were all X-Wings they had to ground because of the bombs, which I guess is possible. The real problem, though, is the idea that 2 MC-90s and 1 MC-80, both of which are between 1,200 and 1,500 meters long, are struggling with 3 900-meter Victory-class Star Destroyers. Maybe Rusk thought that these Mon Cal cruisers were only like Liberty class, so they're 5 to 800 meters long. But if they're the full 12 to 1,500 meter long Mon Cal cruisers, it makes no sense that they would struggle with Victories. It's possible she didn't know that Victories were only 900, and she thought Victories was just a different kind of 1,500 meter Star Destroyer.
Yeah, the Victory being the weakest of the Star Destroyers.
Is a Victory weaker than a Venator?
Well, I don't really think of Venators as Star Destroyers in the Imperial sense. But from that standpoint, yes. The Venator, then Victory, then Impstar 1 or 2. I forget which classes.
The 2 is stronger. The idea is it's an upgrade from the Yavin era to the Empire Strikes Back era. In the 3 years between those movies, the Imperial Star Destroyer got a big upgrade to the 2 class. There's some nice notes on the MC90s, how Wedge likes them because they have a big bubble command deck instead of kind of command viewports like in the MC80s that we see in Return of the Jedi. He thinks that they're more like a starfighter cockpit and helps him to see the battle in 3D space rather than just kind of a flat plane. Admiral Akbar doesn't like them because he thinks they're too big a target for enemy fighters to try and hit, but Wedge prefers them for his own reasons. Wedge also has an assistant named Major Sela, who is competent in civilian affairs, but not battle-tested. I think it's a bit odd that he'd have his chief of staff aide be his capital ship aide, but Russ doesn't seem to pay that much attention to military structure or technology.
Plus, he probably has a bit of like a thrown together quickly crew.
That's true. Wedge, this isn't an official mission, so Wedge had to pull people who were basically loyal to him and Leia, rather than he could just cut orders for anyone. It is noted that Wedge is nervous for the first time in years, so that means it's been a while since he was in a significant battle that we have recorded. And if he did just have Sile, or Ayala was pregnant with Sile, he would feel a bit more nervous about leaving his family that's starting to grow. We have a note that Blue Squadron's A-Wings hit the ties first, which I think is kind of fun, since that means that they are fast and eager for the fight, as all A-Wings usually are. And a note, of course, that Wedge misses flying intensely, which is a nice note. I haven't read the Kevin J. Anderson books in a while, but I don't remember Wedge talking or thinking about missing flying. So having Rusk get that detail, I think, shows that she's more in tune with Wedge's character than he had been written from 1993 to 1996.
Yeah. I also wrote about how that tied into X-Wing in terms of Wedge wanting to be in the X-Wing, but the thing that doesn't work with the previously said books is how he doesn't recognize he's in command of the wild card at the moment when he knows Talon Card from several past instances.
Yeah. He does get some fun hero moments, like figuring out the droid enemy's weaknesses, firing to destroy the Victory class Star Destroyer without his targeting computer. So he gets some of the Luke in A New Hope moments. He has it explicitly says he doesn't have the Force, but he trusts his own abilities. So it's got that kind of Star Wars flavor to it.
Yeah, and how he comes up with the ploy to get the enemy droids to shoot it. Or he shoots at his own ship, so the enemy droids trust him. Felt like X-Wing level, out of the box thinking.
Yeah, I think it fits with Wedge's later character of being whatever the enemy expects you to do, don't do it.
Yeah.
I do, again, this is part of where it feels silly. It feels a bit silly that droids are so dumb that if you just shoot in the wrong direction, they think you're a friendly ship. I get that we didn't have the same kind of experience with AI that we do now, but we have droids like R2 and 3PO, and they clearly have significantly higher reasoning power than just if enemy shoots at enemy, enemy is now friend. That just seems very... It doesn't feel quite plausible to me. I don't know. What did you think about that?
Maybe they thought he was defecting, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, other than that, I don't see a way to make it work.
Yeah, that New Rebellion. Well, let's get your final note about this book, and then let's do an overall discussion of the book and Wedge.
So I had that there's a similarity in how New Rebellion, Black Fleet Crisis, and the Corellian Trilogy all have a mid-90s model of the war between these two superpowers, New Republic and Imperial Remnant, is over, and now there's variations on sectarian or splinter off group conflict and things akin to genocide.
Yeah, and of course you have the models of the IRA, Rwanda, Kosovo, just lots of unfortunate events happening after the Soviet Union pulls out and the United States scales way back in its force projection. Which also plays heavily into our next series that we'll be talking about. But before we get to the Hand of Thrawn, I do want to talk about what do we think about New Rebellion as a book featuring Wedge?
Well, for this, I just read the parts with Wedge in them.
Me too. That's what we're here for.
Right. So, yeah, he's more of a bit part to it, I'd say. But considering his appearance in the movies, that makes sense. I mean, this is not a Wedge Antilles as main character novel, but those didn't really exist yet. And even in Thrawn Trilogy, he's more supporting.
I would say this is a bit more than supporting. I mean, he basically takes the Lando position in Return of the Jedi. He's leading the space combat element, and it's from his point of view for significant chunks of the book.
I guess I didn't think about it in terms of how many of those chunks, or what's the size of those chunks compared to the rest of the book.
I mean, it's definitely less than a quarter of the book, so I wouldn't say he's a main character, but he's more a main character than we would see until the X-Wing books, I would say. Because all the other books that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, he's like in a chapter or less. And this is at least 5 or 6 chapters. Really, his actions really affect the plot. I think given what we had, which is basically the movies, the Thrawn Trilogy, Dark Empire, and the Jedi Academy Trilogy, Rusch does a good job of portraying what Wedge would be like, what he'd kind of feel like, look like, act like in this circumstance. I do think that the weakness of the grasp of technology in starfighter combat and space combat in general does hold it back a bit, especially when you look at how much Stackpole and Allston and Zahn as well really put thought into how space combat would work. They don't kind of have these very basic computer simulator models of space combat to think of. They're trying to think historical battles and how would this transfer to the Star Wars setting. I wouldn't put this on the top of my Wedge recommendations, even though it's pretty good Wedge character-wise. But I do think it's decent. It's definitely way better than what we see of Wedge in Darksaber or the Jedi Academy Trilogy or Dark Empire. I would put it way above those. But I would also put it below the Zahn stuff in terms of just plausibility and my ability to sink myself into Wedge and kind of live through it. I mean, the idea that you can just kind of have one laser cannon hit a Victory Star Destroyer in one spot and it just all blows up. I know that's supposed to be a reference to like the Death Star. But I have a hard time believing that every Imperial ship has just this one spot that if you hit it, it blows up. It just feels too silly to me.
Yeah.
All right. Any last New Rebellion thoughts before we move to the Hand of Thrawn?
No.
Okay. So our first book in the Hand of Thrawn, of course, is Spectre of the Past. Our Wedge section opens with Wedge, Wes Jansen, and Tycho Celchu on the planet of Morisham as part of General Bel Iblis's task force on the borders of the Imperial Remnant and the New Republic. They meet Lando Calrissian and follow a rumor about the Kamos crisis that's convulsing the New Republic. But it turns out to be a con man with access to an old Imperial spy system. They spot a Corellian corvette trying to escape an Imperial Star Destroyer and immediately fly up to try to help. But there's nothing 3 X-Wings and a yacht can do except intercept a transmission from the desperate smaller ship.
Talon Card and his freighter flagship, the Wild Card, visit Booster Tyrik's Imperial Star Destroyer and Casino, the errant venture. Greeted by Nawara Ven, now a major player in Booster's operation. They also find Corran Horn, his son Myrex, and son. Did I say son Myrex?
You did. I was a little confused.
His wife Myrex, and son Valen visiting Booster and putting out feelers for potential Imperial intelligence groups behind the riots over Kamos. They are interrupted by Mara arriving to meet Card and a mysterious alien ship broadcasting a message including Thrawn's full Chiss name.
Wedge's dessert is interrupted by a battle alert, and he and the rogues are called to deal with a problem in the Sif Crick system, where the Fresh attempt to use warships to cause huge economic damage to their rivals, the Sif Crees. Bel Iblis uses Corran's connection to Booster's smuggling operations as a pretext to investigate, spooking the Fresh into attacking and allowing them to take the threat out.
Wedge gets woken in the middle of the night for another battle alert, and it turns out that a Larison attack force plans to annihilate a Bothan space station in retaliation for members of their species killed by Bothan security in a riot earlier. Corran manages to prevent the X-Wings being damaged from Larison sabotage, but the rogues are unable to think of a way to stop the murder of the station. As a result, the various species of the galaxy start sending in capital ships to protect or attack Bothaway, creating a huge flashpoint that could cause civil war all throughout the New Republic.
That brings us to the second volume, Vision of the Future. General Bel Iblis is assigned to try to get a copy of the Kamos document, with a true list of the Bothans who helped destroy the planet Kamos, from the Imperial Ubiquitic base of Yaga Minor. While he plans that attack, he sends Wedge and Corran down to the surface of Bothawui to try to protect the Bothan shield generator from a revenge attack.
Han and Leia are attempting to go on vacation and get attacked at Patrick Minor by an Imperial assassin squadron, but are saved by a squadron of TIE interceptors flown by a sleeper cell of Baron Suntir Fel clones put there by Thrawn. The clones just want to live as farmers with their families, but promise to help Leia and Han find the location of Bastion, the hidden Imperial headquarters world, so Han, Lando, and Lobot can try to hack into its library and get their own copy of the Kamos document.
Wedge and Corran are pickpocketed on Bothawui, but one of Card's agents, Miranda Savage, gets their wallets back, and they decide to team up to find the possible Imperial agents. Bel Iblis convinces Booster to let him use the errant venture to try to sneak into the Yaga Minor base, since it's not one of the well-known New Republic Star Destroyers. As Wedge, Corran, and Miranda find the Imperial spies, Wedge and Corran are called to join the Yaga Minor raid, while Miranda continues pursuing the spies. Wedge wishes her luck.
As Luke and Mara infiltrate a mysterious fortress full of Thrawn spies, which they discover are called the Chiss. They meet General Baron Suntir Fel himself, now an ally of Thrawn's Empire of the Hand in the Unknown Regions, a Chiss and human military coalition of planets and bases all over those systems, representing a huge amount of power that they worry the Empire could use against the New Republic to tip the scales.
The Baron Fel clones meet Han and Leia over Bothawi and point Han towards a strange group of Imperial ships, revealing 3 cloaked Imperial Star Destroyers waiting to ambush the various planetary fleets after Civil War begins. The Imperial spies start the fighting, but the clones help Han warn Leia and Lando of the Star Destroyers, and Lando leads the now united New Republic forces to chase off the Imperial fleet.
As Beliblis tries to sneak into the Yaga Minor base, he is trapped by the apparent return of Grand Admiral Thrawn, who reveals his deception. As Wedge and Rogue Squadron fight desperately on the outskirts of the base to get in and protect Beliblis and Booster, Talon Karrde gives them an edge to slip in behind him as he is carrying Admiral Pelion into the conflict. Wedge and Corran decide to trust Karrde and follow his lead. Once inside the base, Pelion confronts Thrawn, who he reveals to be a con man who is actually working with a corrupt Moff named Tizra and a former stormtrooper named Tierce, who was actually a clone experiment by Thrawn, given tactical genius but no vision beyond revenge because Tierce's clone experiment was a failure. Pelion and Beliblis call a ceasefire between the two sides, and the beginning of peace between the New Republic and the Imperial Remnant truly begins. That's the abbreviated description to focus on Wedge, Corran, Booster, and by extension Beliblis.
Yeah, I was trying to really... The Hand of Thrawn series is basically a trilogy in 2 books. Vision of the Future is super long. And of course, most of it isn't focused on Wedge or the X-Wing characters, but there is a pretty big chunk of it that does. I would say between 25 and 33% of the books are focused on those X-Wing characters, or include them as main characters.
And Zahn collaborated, we may have this later, but yeah, he and Stackpole worked closely on iJedi, the overall plot of those at the same time, because iJedi introduces Kamos. Maybe not introduces. Well, chronologically, it introduces it. I don't remember if Kamos is named in Spectre of the Past or not, but they have one of the shared characters between at least Vision of the Future and iJedi is Elgos Akla, who we talked about previously as Elgos Alfred, in his support of Corran's anti-crime operations on Corcus.
Zahn's writing of Wedge and Wes Jansen's dynamic, even though I'm pretty sure he couldn't have read any of the Wraith books yet, is so perfect. Wes making fun of Wedge goofing with alien customs is amazing. And I had read at least Wraith Squadron before I read Spectre of the Past, and it was perfect. His Tycho isn't as good. He's too fiery and angry all the time, although maybe it's because maybe Zahn and Stackpole had talked about the early Tycho appearances in the X-Wing comics, where Tycho is getting into fights a lot.
Yeah. The parallels in this book are masterfully done, from the start of the end of the war matching the start of the beginning of the war, with a desperate Corellian corvette fleeing an Imperial Star Destroyer, although in this case the corvette was also an Imperial ship, to Luke meeting
technically Leia's an Imperial senator.
Well, yeah, true. To Luke meeting an outsider young alien who wants to see the galaxy and faces a galaxy bigger than he expected. Also, the outsider young alien is great in the audiobook.
And the parallel there, of course, is Luke was the outsider young alien who meets Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and now he's the Jedi Master who meets the outsider and has to teach him about the wider galaxy. Luke,
you go.
Luke and a medical droid talk about the Bacta shortage, which I'm pretty sure is a reference to the Krytos trap when the New Republic just ran out of Bacta.
Yeah, but it makes sense. There could have been following the skirmishes. Okay, not sure if I blipped out for a second there, but I held off my comment. I was going to say maybe the New Republic had to use a lot of Bacta and fallout of the Imperial skirmishes. On another note, I'm planning to switch internet providers shortly, so maybe those issues will not happen going forward. Do you want me to take the next point?
You definitely could theorize that it was because of Imperial skirmishes. I feel like that's definitely not what Zahn intended, because Imperial skirmishes didn't exist till 2008, which was a full decade after this book was written, but is possible. Wedge in these books tends to be much more of an observer rather than an actor or mover. He's very competent, he's very smart and loyal, but he doesn't have much of the think outside the box moments that Allston seared into Wedge's character from Wraith Squadron onwards. But that was, of course, published a year later than Spectre of the Past. It fits with Stackpole's Wedge a lot better. Stackpole's Wedge is a great commander, but he's not quite the same out-of-the-box guy that Allston envisioned. So I would say that's probably because when Zahn and Stackpole were talking back and forth, that's what Stackpole kind of gave Zahn the impression of what he was writing Wedge's character to be. It is really fun to see Wedge and Stackpole's rogues as supporting characters in this grand finale of the Bantam era, but I wouldn't say it gives them an arc or that much pivotal moments.
Yeah. Wedge getting his wallet stolen leads to a line that changes continuity and helps set up Starfighter's Adamar, because Corran tells him that Aiello will never let him live it down, in a context that suggests they're clearly together. And with that one line, the relationship is finally fixed, and Vision of the Future also sets up Luke and Mara finally on the other side of that.
Zahn is just out there fixing all the romantic relationships from the wacko Callista and Quizuk's relationships that they tried to stick in the middle of the Bantam era. The Wedge and Corran plotline is decent. There's a lot of fun bits there, but it doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't affect the outcome of the final book. It's the one piece of Vision of the Future that I think probably should have been edited out, despite the fact that it gives Wedge more to do in the overall story. And of course, it gives us Wedge and Aiello's settled romantic status.
The Miranda scenes are also really funny. I've compared her to Carmen Sandiego several times.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, she also appears in Interlude at Dark Now, having to reluctantly work with one Corsac officer, Howlhorn. I'll let you take the next one.
The Baron Fell clones. Yeah. The Baron Fell clones are a fascinating deepening of clone lore. In the original Thrawn trilogy, Zahn basically portrayed clones as being brainwashed, droid-type soldiers, just following the orders and kind of being very predictable. But in Vision of the Future, the clones are individual people who struggle against their brainwashing, a huge moral and ethical evolution in how clones are portrayed. I would argue that a similar evolution happens between the prequel movies and how they portray the clones as basically droids, and the Clone Wars, which portrays them as individuals who sometimes have their own thoughts and values outside of their orders.
Yeah, it also sets up an interesting element where they don't want to fight. They want to, be on their farms, which ties into how Suntir Fel is portrayed in the Rogue Squadron comics, but was also Thrawn's intention because he was setting them up in case of there was some big war that put those farms at risk. So they wouldn't fight just for any old reason, but to defend their homes, and could be retconned as preparing for the far outsiders, the Yuuzhan Vong, if they were to attack.
Yeah.
Or some
Zahn,
other force from the unknown regions.
yeah. Zahn definitely would say that he is intending them to be foreshadowing and preparation for an intergalactic invasion like the Vong. Editorial would never let him go quite that far, but I think it makes some sense.
Yeah. The Air Adventure was actually a Timothy Zahn plot point that Stackpole had set up 2 years before. It was important for Vision of the Future, which is another way they collaborated.
And of course, all the Baron Fell stuff. Mike Stackpole created Baron Fell, and he told Tim Zahn the same day that he came up with the character. And Tim Zahn was like, "Well, I'll put that into Spectre of the Past and Vision of the Future." While Wedge is more of an observer than a strong personality in these two books, Corran and Booster come out with much stronger characterizations. I'd say that Zahn's close collaboration with Stackpole ensured that there was a lot more X-Wing characters and lore mixed with the big events of the Bantam era, pushing them forward into the new Jedi Order and beyond, even outside of Stackpole and Allston's contributions to those series. So I think that if Zahn hadn't collaborated so closely with Stackpole, we might have seen Wedge and Tycho and Corran and Gavin kind of disappear. But because Zahn put them so prominently in these books, I think later authors were like, oh, well, we want a military character. We already have these military characters. So I think that was a good thing for us X-Wing fans, because it means that the X-Wing books aren't just a side series you can ignore, but they tie directly into the major books of the Bantam era.
Yeah. Beyond the Bantam era, that does lead to some oddities like Gavin being in charge of the Marines.
Well, we're
but
definitely
we
not
won't go into that.
about that book in this podcast. We do have one small, sad Luke note. He leaves behind his old X-Wing, R2's counterpart, that he created back in the Thrawn Trilogy and Heir to the Empire. And Kristine Kathryn Rusch actually referenced that R2 and the X-Wing were counterparts, much closer than the normal droid starfighter pairing. So it is sad that we finally lose that 25-year-old X-Wing.
And Corran lost his in Ice Heart's Revenge, unless it was able to be repaired.
Well, I definitely lost a big chunk of it, like a whole wing or
Yeah.
two. They probably fixed it, though. Now we'll get to our wing books. So what book or other kind of story would we recommend to people who liked this month's books? And I said Starship Troopers, the classic military sci-fi book. A lot of military philosophy that really fits with Wedge's philosophical ideals of service and what is ethical in war versus kind of a pragmatic whatever works. Wedge doesn't embrace that. I also wanted to mention a song called Whenever I'm With You by the artist Sad Alex, which you can find on YouTube or Spotify, which I think is a perfect Wedge and Ayala romance song from Starfighters of Adamar. There's about 4 or 5 lines that directly connect to Wedge and Ayala's romantic journey and what they mean to each other in that book. So I heard that for the first time this month and wanted to mention it here.
So my wing book was, and this was based off Vision of the Future specifically, was the novel Trinity's Child, which is an early 1980s look at what a nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union could turn into with political leaders and military personnel on both sides trying to stop the exchange. That was turned into an HBO movie in 1990, I believe, renamed as By Dawn's Early Light, and stars James Earl Jones. Also was told to mention that when I was writing my Torsai Con Air fan series, the lead woman in it was a bit of inspiration, particularly on what hair would look like under the helmet of a pilot's helmet, that is. So,
and now we get to our sludge news section. So we don't normally do Star Wars news because we're so focused on the expanded universe, but for the first time since, oh goodness, at least 4 or 5 years ago, we have
2020 it was.
Is that when Rogue Squadron was announced?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so Rogue Squadron was announced 2020. We've had a couple of reports that they're working on it. But all of a sudden, we have an announcement of a movie called Starfighter coming out in 2 years in May 2027. It's reported to be directed by Sean Levy, who recently directed Deadpool 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, and the movie Three Guy, which also starred Ryan Reynolds. They're planning to start filming this fall, so it is not yet in production, but it's in pre-production. They say they have a script written by Jonathan Tropper, who wrote The Adam Project, also directed by Sean Levy and starring Ryan Reynolds. A movie called This Is Where I Leave You, a TV show Your Friends and Neighbors, and a TV show called Warrior. I am unfamiliar with any of these projects, but I have, of course, seen Deadpool, Wolverine, and Free Guy. The star of the movie is Ryan Gosling, who, of course, was in Barbie and Drive and The Notebook and First Man. Lots of stuff. Ryan Gosling's been working for quite a while. Oh, and The Fall Guy, the stuntman movie last summer. They say it's set 5 years after the Rise of Skywalker, which is kind of exciting. First time we're moving past those Rise of Skywalker events in a significant way. And so I wanted to say, what are our hopes and thoughts based on the creative team attached to this project? What would we like to see?
It's interesting because this is kind of the final nail in the coffin, it seems like, for Rogue Squadron.
Yeah.
I doubt they'd be making 2 Starfighter-esque movies, and judging by which X-Wing was behind Patty Jenkins in the announcement video, it seems like that would have been after Rise of Skywalker as well. My hope for a Rogue Squadron movie before all this newest announcement would have been something that takes place after Rise of Skywalker, so they can have Dennis Lawson as Wedge in it back, but also maybe, since he's older, have it be a split timeline so he's not having to do all the work himself. Something where it's following an Imperial villain, maybe akin to Isard or Zinj, in the post-OT era, essentially when the X-Wing novels were set in Legends, and then this believed to have been defeated villain returns post Rise of Skywalker. So you've got a frame story about how Wedge and his group defeated the villain the time before, and now he's training a new force to go and fight that villain in the main post-sequels timeline.
That'd be interesting. I would definitely love to see Dennis Lawson return as Wedge in kind of a mentor or trainer role. I don't know if he'd be interested. I don't know how viable it would be for him to be a main character at his current age. Though, of course, as a Wedge lover, and if they wrote him well, I would definitely be down for it. But I think that with Ryan Gosling being the main character, I don't think that Wedge would be the main character. I would assume this is a new pilot, and if Wedge is in it, he'd be kind of like an Obi-Wan, although hopefully he wouldn't die. If they kill Wedge like that, I would be very sad. which probably means they are going to do it, since Star Wars Disney appears to exist just to make me sad. I've seen a couple of these Sean Levy movies. I have never seen any movies or TV written by Jonathan Tropper, and I've seen a couple of movies with Ryan Gosling. I think Gosling is fine. He's a bit tall for a starfighter pilot, but I guess that's fine. It's going to be, I think it's clear it's going to be kind of an action comedy, because that's what Sean Levy seems to do best. He likes to do really fun action, lots of humor, and keep it relatively light. Whereas I think Patty Jenkins was probably going to be a lot darker, kind of more like Zero Dark 30 or Hurt Locker.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar as you are with Sean Levy's stuff, but the Gosling cast is interesting given his role in First Man, which is also a pilot and astronaut as Neil Armstrong, and has a lot of the heavyweight in terms of Armstrong dealing with the death of his daughter and just the overall risks of what he's doing, both before the moon landing and with Gemini and the X-15. So, some people were, wondering about how high profile an actor and casting he is compared to past Star Wars projects, having such a recognizable face. But I think this could work well. Of course, in Legends kind of subreddits, there's also been jokes of, will he be playing Corran Horn?
He's way too tall for Corran Horn. What are you talking about? I don't have really high hopes, but I'll definitely see it unless the trailers are absolutely awful. So,
or if it never gets to the trailer stage.
The fact that they have a release date in 2 years, I think, is why I have more of an idea that this is probably going to happen. And the fact that they have a star, director, and writer attached, whereas before in Rogue Squadron, it was just Patty Jenkins. She didn't have a cast. She didn't have any co-writers. She didn't have a production start time set.
Yeah, obviously, 2020 was not a good year to be announcing a project.
They didn't know that was going to happen, but no, that was a terrible time to announce.
Because, pandemic and writer strikes, actors, I forget what all has happened, but that is probably not going to be a movie anymore.
Yeah.
It's been essentially canceled, but then there was talk last year, I think, that it might still come back, as Jenkins' involvement with Marvel has gone up and down. Not Marvel, DC.
Yeah. A lot of people really hated Wonder Woman 1984. I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. So I was still okay with her doing a Star Wars movie, but there's so many people you'll talk to like, oh man, I'm so glad that didn't happen because Wonder Woman 1984 was so bad. And I'm like, okay, I thought it was fine.
I didn't actually see it myself.
It's not something I'd rush out, but I enjoyed it. It did have a fun fighter plane scene in it, though.
Yeah, and obviously this was mentioned in the announcement video, but the project would have been personal for her, as her father was a U.S. Air Force pilot who died in a training exercise when she was a kid.
Yep. What could have been? Let's all hope that Mike Stackpole can write the novelization of Starfighter. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Now, you recently saw Revenge of the Sith 20th anniversary in one of their revival theater showings, and you had some X-Wing thoughts about that.
Yes, it was amusing to think of these as I was watching, but then I'm in the theater and I can't write them down. So this is the ones I remembered most. obviously spoilers for X-Wing and the movie. So how there's Grievous firing off all the escape pods other than his own as he flees his flagship to trap Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Palpatine on board while it goes down was a bit reminiscent of Apwar Tridget in Wraith Squadron, the novel, fleeing the Implacable and letting it go down with all hands to cover its escape. Of course, that didn't work for him either. The enemy were activating people to fire on their commanders through Order 66 and the Twi'lek brainwashing plot in Solo Command, which then leads to Han nearly going out of Mon Rama's bridge through explosive decompression, which is another trick Grievous tries to use on Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Palpatine earlier in the movie. You have the overly large holograms of Sidious, which is a tactic I know Zinj used, having his be excessively large. I wouldn't be surprised if Isar did it either. And then when I was seeing a scene on, I don't think it's actually Tantive 4, but Bail Organa's Corellian Corvette, effectively the same type of ship as Tantive 4 or Nightcaller, though that had heavy modifications. Toward the end of Revenge of the Sith, you see him walking with his Captain Antilles, a male aide, and then a woman behind the group of three. And it had me wondering, could that be Winter's mom, perhaps? And then it turns out Wikipedia has, in fact, defined that as Winter's mother. So maybe I'd already seen that and forgotten until I saw the moment. I don't know. But not surprising that would happen as an X-Wing tie-in.
And I would say that all these parallels make it feel like Allston really gets Star Wars and the little details and the kinds of plots that Lucas likes to play with. Now, next month, we will be tackling the Union comic miniseries by Michael A. Stackpole, which I consider the last of the X-Wing comics, and you'll have to tune in next month to find out why. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening. I've been Wedge.
And I've been Red 14.
Keep your books locked in reading position.